In a universe as vast and mysterious as Marvel's, power takes many forms. But among the cosmos, 6 relics stand unmatched. Artifacts forged from the very fabric of creation itself. These are the Infinity Gems. Each one embodies a primal force of existence. Space, reality, power, soul, mind, and time. Together, they hold the key to reshaping the universe or destroying it entirely. From Asgard to nowhere, from Earth to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, these gems have altered destinies, sparked wars, and tested the will of heroes and villains alike.
Iron Man.
So how powerful is the power gem in MCP? Okay, I think we need to talk about Infinity Gems. Hey guys, Rich from Rich Big Gaming. Hope everyone is doing fantastically well. Welcome to this, another MCP video, and a type of video that I haven't done for quite some time. Yes, I'm going to be taking a look at an area of the game that I think should be a priority for AMG over 2025 to really fix and make workable and make viable, and that is of course the Infinity Gems. They are a huge part of the Marvel Comics. I remember reading the Infinity Gauntlet series when I was younger, and obviously for the first 4 phases of the MCU, leading up to Thanos taking them all and destroying half of the universe, only for it to be reversed by Hulk, and then indeed Iron Man doing the courageous thing and sacrificing himself, making that big play that Captain America told him he wouldn't do. And I think it's fair to say that these devices, artifacts of immeasurable power, are not really portrayed particularly well in Marvel Crisis Protocol today for a number of reasons. But before we get into those reasons, let's jump in and familiarize ourselves with the gems themselves, who can wield them and what they do. So of course we have 6 Infinity Gems in Marvel Crisis Protocol, and for me in the comics there's always been 6. Like I said, the original Infinity Gauntlet series and Infinity War series was 6. I think at some point they introduced some others, but we are sticking with, I would call, quote unquote, the main 6, which of course are going to be mind, power, reality, time, soul, and space. And I'm really pleased with myself that I remembered all 6 of them without any prompt, and I promise there was no prompt there. So let's take a look, and I've broken these down into 2 different groups. Those that have active or reactive superpowers that require you to pay to use them, and then those that have innate superpowers that don't require any cost. So let's start off then, and let's take a look at the 3 that have active or reactive superpowers. So first of all, we've got the Time Gem. This is going to cost 2. This is going to be reactive, and it's going to be when this character is attacking before the calculate success or failure step at the end of the modify step of the attack, it may use this superpower. The attacking and defending character reroll all of their attack and defense dice, including failure results. So this is a recal matrix that you can use multiple times, basically. Not multiple times within a single attack, but obviously multiple times within the duration of a game. And it's fine. Like, I would just say that it's fine. Now we have to remember some things that all Infinity Gems do and things that they bring with them. So it's not printed anywhere on the cards themselves, but just by bringing an Infinity Gem with a character, they are automatically going to gain 1 additional power during the power phase. So if you generate 1 power as standard, you're going to generate 3. And you'll also notice that each of the gems have a threat level. Now, there's been many iterations of these gems, but right now in the game, each of the gems adds 1 additional threat to your character. So if your character is 3 threat and you take a gem with them, they're going to become a 4 threat character. So with that out of the way, let's move on then to Mind. Again, this is going to be a 2 cost, but this time it's going to be an active superpower. Choose an enemy character within 3 and advance it short. This superpower can be used only once per turn. Again, I quite like this one. I think it's really nice. It's nice and thematic. And then rounding out them, we've got the Space Gem. Again, this is going to cost 2. It's going to be active. And it's this time choose this character or another allied character within 3 and place it within 2 of its current position. And again, it can only be used once per turn. Moving on to the innate cards then, we've got the Reality Gem. This is going to be when rolling dice as part of an attack, defense, dodge, or interact roll. This character treats 1 failure result as a crit result. Now, depending on when you choose to treat this, if it's before the resolve critical step, you're going to be able to explode that failure into a crit. If it's after the resolve critical explosion, so let's say you've rolled a crit already and you roll that crit into a fail and you don't have any other fails, you can actually include that as a crit, but you're not going to be able to explode it. And equally, if you re-roll into a failure, you're going to be able to include one of those as well, but you're not going to be able to explode it because that timing window has already passed. We've then got the Power Gem. This generates 2 additional power rather than 1. So all of the other gems generate 1 power. This one generates 2. And then lastly, we've got the Soul Gem. When an enemy character within 4 of this character uses an active or reactive superpower, this character gains 1 power after the effect is resolved. So that's what the gems do. That's how they work. Let's take a look at who can bring them. So starting out, we've got Doctor Strange, who can bring the Soul and Time Gem. We've got Ebony Maw, who can bring the Space and Mind Gem. We've got Loki, who can also bring the Space and Mind Gem. We've then got Black Swan, who can bring the Power Gem. We've got Namor the Submariner, who can bring the Time Gem should he wish. We've then got Corvus Glaive, who, yes, as well as the Reality, can also bring the Time Gem as well. We've then got Supergiant, who can bring the Soul Gem. And then we've got Star-Lord, who can bring the Power, and Ronan the Accuser, who can also bring the Power Gem. And then, of course, rounding it out, we've got the Big Daddy himself, the wielder of the Infinity Gauntlet. It is, of course, Thanos the Mad Titan, who can choose any of the gems that he wants to bring with him. Now, that's 10 characters in total who can bring gems. But it's fair to say that not all characters are really seen in the game, especially at a competitive level, bringing gems. And there's a few reasons for that, but just to give you an idea, if you look at stats and things like that from events, there's only really 3 characters who are viable with gems, at least in my opinion, right now in the game. And that's going to be Black Swan with the Power. It's going to be Corvus Glaive with his Reality Gem. And then for Thanos, even though he can bring all 6, or he can bring any mixture of the 6, he can choose to bring 2. And really the only gems that you see on Thanos are going to be Reality, Space, and Mind, because the rest of them just don't really work that well at the moment. So now we know what they do, who can wield them, let's talk about the gem problems, because I think there's potentially more than one. And let's start off and talk about something I think is really, really important. And that is that they don't change the baseline stats of a character. Now, baseline stats are really one of the key differentiators between a 2 and a 3 threat, a 3 and a 4 threat, so on and so forth. And a lot of the times with gems, when you add that gem to that character and you go from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5, they feel very, very underwhelming for that threat level. And often they can end up being a worse character because that extra threat means you can't take a 5 threat over a 4 threat or a 6 threat over a 5 threat. There is one exception to that, and I would say the reality gem. Whilst it doesn't change the baseline stats of a character, whenever you're rolling dice, you have an additional 1/8 of a chance or 1 in 8 of a chance to roll a success. And that success can actually be a crit. So it can, become a crit, and then that crit can explode into another result. So rolling 3 dice on Thanos, for example, because you get to count one extra side of the die, at least on one of your rolls, or one of the dice, and then you get to explode that, it ends up boosting up the numbers quite significantly. But let's take a look, for example, at Star-Lord. So he's 3s across the board, 6 stamina on his front, 5 stamina on his back. His element gun is 5 dice, and his full auto is 7 dice. And really, other than his full auto and his hit and run, are the only 2 things that he wants to be spending power on, unless there's maybe a tactics card or something like that. Now let's take a look at the power gem. Well, we already know from the previous, it's going to add 1 threat, so it makes him from being a 3 threat character up to a 4 threat, and it's going to generate 2 additional power per turn. Now, if you were to put 2 additional power on the bottom of Star-Lord's card, just as a thing, and made him 4 threat, he would be significantly worse. And this is effectively what the power gem does. So when you then look at him as a 4 threat character with the same attacks, he's got the same 3s across the board stat line, and he's still only got 6 stamina on his front and 5 stamina on his back, and compare him to other good 4 threat characters, he really, really starts to drop off. And I think this is one of the key problems from the gems themselves, is what they give just doesn't bump them up that extra threat level, ultimately by changing any baseline stats. Next up then is what they do just isn't worth the overall cost. So there's a couple of opportunity costs when we're looking at a Infinity Gem card. First of all is obviously the threat that we've just spoke about. It increases the threat level of a character from X to Y by 1. And then there's also the cost of actually using it itself. So the time gem, for example, when this character is attacking before the calculate success or failure step, at the end of the modified dice step of the attack, it may use this superpower. You reroll them all, including crits. And it's not that the time gem is bad, but let's take a look at where the time gem is and whether or not you really think it's worthwhile taking on either of those characters. So Doctor Strange and Namor the Submariner. Now I've excluded Corvus Glaive from this list because if you're taking a gem with Corvus, which you usually are, it's going to be the reality gem. But let's take a look at Doctor Strange and see what moving him from a 5 threat up to a 6 threat is, and then what this gem actually does for him. Well, it's going to give him 1 extra power per turn, so that's quite nice, generating 2 power. But the time gem itself is going to cost 2 power, and it's going to do something that he can already do, and he can actually do it much, much better. So he has an ability called the Eye of Agamotto. This character may modify and reroll failure dice results. Well, okay, that's already a thing that the time gem allows him to do. And then this character may reroll all of its attack or defense dice once per attack. So he gets to do it both attacking and defending. Yes, he doesn't get to modify your opponent's dice. But really, is this something that you really want to have on Doctor Strange? The answer is no, and the stats prove that. Equally with Namor, yes, it does bump him up from being 2 power per turn to 3 power per turn because he already generates power, which means that he can use an Imperious Rex turn 1, which can be quite nice, but he's not going to have power then to be able to use the time gem. He's also, a midline extract play. Like, that's generally how Namor is played. And again, that 2 power cost to be able to reroll when he already has an inbuilt reroll as well, I just don't think is worth the overall cost. Then the other side of this is that the ones that are used on certain characters are just too good. So obviously, Big Daddy Thanos. Generally with Thanos, you're going to see him in 2 different situations. You're going to see him as the leader of Black Order, and you're going to see him splashed as an 8-threat character. And the latter is really where we're seeing him more and more these days. Black Order are not in a particularly good spot. But if you do see him, you're generally going to see him with with 2 of 3 gems. So by himself, without being in Black Order, because Corvus usually wants the reality gem, he's going to be taking that reality gem in most places. And then a combination of the space or mind gem alongside that, that's just going to be down to personal preference. Now with Thanos, he gets the benefit of all of the power generation. So he's going to be generating an extra 2 power per turn if he is taking 2 gems with him. But because of his being of immeasurable power, he gets to use those active or reactive abilities for free. And even though he gets to use them for free, it shows you how good the reality gem is because he takes the reality gem with him. Now remember this, we're going to park that for the moment, and then we're going to come back and have a little bit of a discussion around how I think this could be incorporated into the cards themselves. So what does good and balanced look like? Well, it's really difficult in MCP because we don't really have much in the way of other reference points for things like gems, extra cards that you get to take that are stapled to a character that unlock and enable additional superpowers or innate abilities and those sorts of things. The one reference point we do have is going to be the Servants of Apocalypse and the Horseman card in particular. So for me, they incorporated the Horseman cards in a much, much better way than they ever have done with the Infinity Gems. It gives everybody a innate power, and it gives everybody an active superpower that they can use during their turn. And I think they are pretty good. They work well in the game. They're thematic and they're fairly balanced. And they also, they generate their extra own little power resource that can be used on these cards as well. So, with all that down, changes I would make. Open brackets, part 1, close brackets. I've broken this down into 2 separate trains of thought. The first one we'll go through in a little bit more detail. It's the one that I think is the easiest to implement. The second would be much harder, but I actually think would be much, much better. But let's start with the changes I would make part 1. So first thing is I'm going to suggest 2 blanket-wide changes to all of the gems. And the first one is we're going to remove the additional power generation from all gems. Why do I think this is important? Well, I think it's important because it stops some of the turn 1, round 1 shenanigans that AMG quite clearly don't like. And when you see the second part, you'll also realise why I've removed this as well. And the second part is we're going to remove the power cost requirements for all of the superpowers. I personally think that the opportunity cost of 1 extra threat should be enough to be able to not just have access to the additional superpower, but to be able to use it for free effectively. And because we're removing that power gain, I believe it kind of balances it out. So now I'm going to get into each individual card and the changes I would make, but remembering these 2 blanket changes are going to apply across the board. So let's start out with 2 cards that I think are absolutely fine. It's going to be the Mind and the Space Gem. I think if we remove the power generation from them, and then we also remove that 2 cost ability for the actual abilities themselves, I think that is going to be perfectly fine. And I think that you would see other characters using these cards. Yes, it's not changing any of their stats, but actually getting a mind gem ability for free once per turn is definitely worth that extra one threat that a character would cost. And similarly with the space gem, I think they're fine. You could argue that you might want to tweak the numbers a little bit, so maybe it's range 2 rather than range 3 for the positioning side of it, and then maybe it's a range 1 place or something like that. But I believe that the essence of them, and even with the numbers they've got, would be absolutely fine if we remove that 2 cost, but also remove the power generation as well. Next one is going to be the power gem. Now, this card is utterly terrible. An infinity gem effectively just generating 1 extra power, especially on the characters that it's on, just is not worth it. Black Swan, there's an argument to say she is slightly better with it, but even then, it's not the best. So instead of just generating 2 additional power per turn, which is what it does right now, remembering the 1 we've already taken off it and the extra 1 here, this character adds 1 dice to each of their attack rolls. So this goes back into this idea of increasing stat lines. Yes, we're not affecting the defensive stat lines, so stamina or the actual 3 numbers that you're looking at with mystic, energy and physical defense. But what we are going to do is be able to increase the damage output of a character, and I think this would work really well. I actually think, and what I've put on here as well, is actually let them take another power, right? Let it generate an extra power per turn. I think this, again, with all of the other rules that we've sort of implemented there, would work perfectly fine. I don't think it would make anybody particularly broken. Star-Lord goes from a 5 dice base attack on his spender to a 6 dice base attack on his spender. Well, that feels more in line with what a 4-threat character would have. Next up then, we've got the time gem. And this is one that I just really don't think works particularly well. But I think I've got a really nice change to it. And it's only a little bit of wording. And it's going to be when this character or another allied character within range 4 is attacking or defending, and then everything else. So remember, we're getting to do this for free. So to balance doing it for free, we're going to limit it to once per round, which means you're going to get to use this, maybe 6 times throughout the entirety of a game, which I still think is absolutely fine. Being able to stop your opponent from having that big spike. Maybe range 4 is too much. Maybe range 4 is just right. But I think making this, turning the time gem into more of a support piece would play into characters like Doctor Strange, where he's already boosting dice and things like that. And I think this could work really well. Next up then, we have got the Soul Gem. And this is another one that I think is just really bad. The only time you used to see the Soul Gem being taken was on OG Strange, which meant that you could do portals during the first turn of the game. And now, because of the changes to portals, you do not see this card played. And I also don't think it captures the essence of what the Soul Gem is. The Soul Gem is used for many different things. It can use to bring back the dead. It can be used to destroy and rip the soul out of somebody's body. And I think leaning into that damage side and causing damage side of things, I'd like to see it look something like after an attack made by an enemy character within range 3 of this character is resolved, you may use this superpower. The attacking character suffers 1 damage for each failure in the attack roll. This is sort of combining a couple of other abilities out there that we've got. It just becomes innate again, and it's one that can just be used time and time again. I think if you were to add this into somebody like a Doctor Strange, I think you'd see a lot more play with him. Again, we're removing that one extra power that it generates per turn, and it becomes a bit more of a support piece. I suppose an anti-support piece. It's sort of chip damage and things like that. We've reduced the range as well, because I think range 4 would be a little bit egregious on this one. But I really like this, and I think it lends itself more to what the Soul Gem is, what it does, and what the bearer of it does in the comics. So rounding them out then, we've got the Infinity Gem Reality. And this one is a bit of a problem. As we already went through, it works on pretty much everything: attack, defense, dodge, or interact. And at any point during that, you can treat one failure as a crit. So we're only making some small changes, but when rolling dice as part of an attack, defense, dodge roll, before the resolve critical step, this character may treat one failure result as a crit result. So this does a couple of things. First of all, again, we're removing that power generation from the card, but we're meaning that anything after the resolve critical step, if you don't have that failure in your first roll or your initial roll, you're not going to be able to use this. It's still going to be powerful when you do roll that failure, but it just means it tones it down that little bit so that you're not getting access to it further in the timing step. I also think removing it from interact is quite a nice little extra as well. It just means then that those characters wielding the Reality Gem are not immune to any of those triggers that happen on the pay to flips. Not that it's a big thing, but I think it's just an extra little thing that does just tone it down ever so slightly. So that's my part 1 to the changes I would make, or my first idea on changes that we can make to the card. And it's very much designed around taking the system we've got today, but tweaking the gems themselves so that they are more attractive to some characters and they're less powerful for other characters. So for example, Thanos' being of immeasurable power, where he gets to use them all for free, well, that kind of disappears. It's not an advantage that he has now. He still gets to use them for free, but what he's not going to get is all of that innate power generation, because I think those two things combined are one of the things that was making Thanos very, very good. So, with all that done, I want to jump into part 2. So this is less of a part 2, more of an idea 2 that I want to go through. And I want to take a quick look at Thanos again. Because Thanos has, we've already mentioned it, his being of immeasurable power. So Thanos has a superpower that directly interacts and works with Infinity Gems. It lets him take 2 rather than 1, and it lets him use them for free. Now, in the world that I was talking about, obviously that would have gone away, but this is a slightly different world now that we're going into. And the idea behind it is that if you read the comics, if you watch the movies, depending on who the character is, are they good, are they evil, are they down the middle, they will use the gems in different ways. The Soul Gem, for example, doesn't do just one thing. It can do multiple things that affect the soul. That can be for the good, it can be used for healing, or it can be for bad. So let's explore that a little bit further and see what it could look like if we moved away from these cards having just one specific group of text on them, and rather than it being an ability on the card that you give to the player, it becomes an ability on the actual character card itself that you unlock by taking the gem. So let's take a look at Doctor Strange, for example. We're going to stick with the Soul Gem. And, you look at Doctor Strange's kit, he is very much a support piece. He's boosting defense dice of characters, and he's also removing damage from them as well. So let's play into that, and let's build the Soul Gem around what Doctor Strange wants to be doing. So maybe something like when this character or an allied character within 4 would suffer damage from an enemy effect, reduce the damage taken by 1. Now, You could put to a minimum of 1 or something like that in there. And then this character gains 1 power for each damage reduced this way. So by having that on his card, rather than on the actual gem itself, it means we can start to tailor what the gems do for individual characters. And for me, that means 2 things. First of all, they become relevant. We're not having a time gem that does exactly, or not exactly, but a very, very similar thing to what Doctor Strange already does. We're not having a soul gem that's pretty much useless. So I really like this idea of tailoring an ability that's on the character's card that then becomes unlocked when they take that particular gem with them. And obviously for Doctor Strange, he would have 2 on there. Now, you may need to work around some text and things like that because there's not a lot of room on Doctor Strange's card, but he is due for an updated version of the card that's in landscape rather than portrait. So maybe that's something they can do on there. Well, let's stick with the soul gem. And let's take a look at a character like Supergiant, for example. What is Supergiant all about? Well, she's dealing damage. She's a mental vampire, so she's got a drain life ability on there. She's ethereal, so she's all about dishing out that extra bit of damage. So she wants to use the soul gem in a very, very different way to Strange. She wants to use it for evil rather than the good that Strange is using it for. So what about keeping that first part? So after an attack made by an enemy character within range 3 of this character is resolved, you may use this superpower. The attacking character suffers 1 damage if there were any failures in the attack roll. This character removes 1 damage. And you'd probably caveat that and say, you need the failure to be triggered for the damage to be taken off and things like that. And I'm not saying that these are the 2 things that these 2 particular characters should have with these gems. But I really, really like the idea of having tailored gems to each individual character and it being text on their card, or indeed we have multiple versions of the soul gem, right? AMG do print to play really, really well. So why couldn't you have Soul Gem, Supergiant, and this is what it did for her. Soul Gem, Doctor Strange, that's what it does for him. I think it'd be a really, really good way of making sure that we kept them good, but we also kept them balanced. And the abilities of one character didn't mean that something you do on the gem would be too broken for another character to use. So I think this is my preferred way. Realistically, I think the first way is more likely, but I really, really do wish they would put a little bit more time and an effort into the gems, just making them that much better. And there we go, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. I think it's fair to say that gems in this game are not particularly well represented, other than those, 2, maybe 3 characters we spoke about, especially in competitive play. And they're such a big part of, for me at least, reading the comic books when I was younger, watching the films when I was a little bit older, and I just don't think they're portrayed particularly well within the game at the moment. But as always, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you've got some ideas for what each of the gems could be used, let me know everything down in the comment section below, because I'd love to read through them and get some ideas from you guys. And who knows, maybe AMG will watch this and get some ideas for themselves. It's highly unlikely. Guys, I want to give a big shout out to all of our Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you guys so much for the constant support that you give me. You guys make the running of the channel that much easier. And if you do want to support us, you can do so from as little as £1 a month. There'll be a link down in the description below for Patreon, or you can just click that join button to become a YouTube member. But as always, you don't need to do either of those things. Just simply liking, commenting, subscribing and sharing really, really does go a long way to help getting this content out there. And a goal for mine for 2025 is to hit that 10,000 subscriber mark. We're about 75% of the way there at the moment. So if you could hit that subscriber subscribe button. It would mean the absolute world and help me to get to those 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I want to give a big shout out to Leodis Games, sponsor of the channel. Thank you so much to Neil and the rest of the team. And if you do want to use them, there'll be a link down in the description below where you can get £5 off your first qualifying order. Also, check out the Discord. It's where we run all of our events and other such things. And as always, guys, it leaves me with just enough time to say stay well, keep safe, and until next time, bye for now.